We were talking about the earliest attempts to translate any form of or part of the Bible into English. We talked about the earliest we know about being Caedmon's songs, his poems that were Bible stories. It wasn't really a translation of the Bible, but just stories from the Bible translated. And in the time of Caedmon, a lot of the people, the way that they learned the Bible stories, if they knew any Bible stories, was that they would go to the church, they would go to Mass, and sometimes on the side of the altars or on the walls or whatever, that they would have little stone cuts or little pictures that represented certain Bible stories, and the priest would just tell them a little story about Jesus turning the water into wine or healing the widow's son or something like that. And so this was the state of things. And then in 700, this priest, Aldhelm, translated the Psalms into English, not too long after 700. And then we know from Bede's writings and stuff and from other things that Bede, this little monk from Yarrow, translated some parts of the New Testament into English before he died in AD 735. But we don't have any surviving manuscripts of that translation. So we know by the information we have that he did it, but we don't have any of it. And this is, again, some of the English from that period. And if you took the time to just really study this slide and look at every word, you'd be hard-pressed to get anything out of it. So we talk about Caedmon, this monk in the 600 that was actually a herder of cows and a poet of sort. And he spun some of these poetic songs and told some Bible stories. And he was the one that was famous for first putting anything from the Bible into the actual native tongue of the people in the British Isles. So this is the story of Moses and Pharaoh and the Red Sea in the language of Caedmon. So here you are in England. Picture yourself sitting there, and Caedmon's going to sing one of his little songs to you. And he says, Nebioth gedi fortun thea the Pharaon brota, svierd vigendra, iorla unrim, elam vil mightig dreiten for mine hand, to dega thisum deadly and giffen, that he life kinde lang nemoten, egnian mid yurthum Israel kin. Ne willeth jou on dreden de de faithen, verge forth lesen, first et ende lenes liefes. And everybody goes, yeah. Everybody goes like that. And they said, that was a cool story. So let's look at it in a little more detailed. Nebioth ge de fortran theeth de Pharaon brota. Be not frightened thereat, though Pharaoh has brought. Well, fortran, frightened. Ne is not. Beoth, be. Frightened. Gethi is thereat, at this. And then Thea, the Pharaoh has brota. So you have the word brought, B-R-O-G-H-T, or B-R-O-U-G-H-T, brota. So there's linguistic similarity there, but for us, just hearing it or seeing it, forget it. Sphered vigendra. Sword, say a sphered. Get your sphered out and let's cut this guy. Wield, vigendra, wielders, people that use swords, sword wielders. Yorla unrim, vast troops. See, I mean, it's communicating that Pharaoh's troops with all their swords, they were coming. So this part, ille ville mightig dreiten thur mine hand to dage this deadly and giffen. Well, to them all will. Well, see, you've got eolam. See the second word in the top line, eolam? Do you see in the middle of that word the word A-L-L? All. But see, you've got eolam. Now the word H-I-M is their word for several different things, including T-H-E-M. So H-I-M there means T-H-E-M, them. And W-I-L-E, Wille, is will, like our W-I-L-L. See? So it means to them all will. And then Metig Dreiten, that's mighty, Metig, mighty, Dreiten, Lord. And Thur mine hand, through my hand. See? Then the third line, this very day. Now look at the two words, today. Well, today we say today, right? But if you look at the third line there, today, see, it's the same word as today. But it used to be two words, this day, to this, dega, day. So today is this day. Then this very day recompense give. The word give, G-I-V-E, is G-Y-F-A-N, giffen. So it's similar, isn't it? You can hear a similar sound. There's linguistic similarities. But the language is very different. And it sounds Germany, doesn't it?
Norwegian, to me.
Yeah, Norwegian, Germany, that kind of thing. And that's the kind of language it is. And all of those different languages could trace parts of their language. Some of these words are words that still survive in German. Some of these words are still surviving in Norwegian. You know, but these are the kinds of words that make up our mutt language, English. Now here's another example from Cadlin. Ne kon ich noch singen, and ich forhon of Pielsum. I can sing not or nothing. See, ni kon, I can. Ich noch singen, I cannot sing. And then he says, and ich forpon peosum, and for that reason, or probably the P is an R, ich for ron of reosum. So it's sort of like the rho in Greek. It's got an R sound. And for that reason, I went out from this. Went out is ut oed. And hinder giwat came hither because I did not know how to sing. Ich nach singen nehwe. See, I did not know how to sing. So there's some of it that sounds German. Some of it is really close to English. Sing, singen. Ich not, I did not know, you know. But the man insists, Huedra rumet me singen. Huedra, however, rumet, you can, you may, sing to me. Me, singen. Then Caedmon asks, what shall I sing? Huit shall ich singen? See, what shall I sing? Which shall ich singen? Interesting, huh? Because whit is it's the ancient form of our word what. Sial is our ancient word shall. Ich, see, ich is the same as German, if you know any German. Ich bin ein Frau, you know. You could say, I'm a woman or I'm a man. So, ich. Whit shall ich singen? What shall I sing? And then The answer is, sing me a song about creation. Singen me Frumschaft. Sing me about creation. So, I mean, this probably bores you to death, but it's fascinating to me because I can see the relationships between words that used to be and words that now are. And I can see how they've changed and they've become different. They've become similar but different. And you can go on and on with this, but these are Old English and modern English translations showing people how different the language was then to how the language is now. And see that this really helps because people who say, you know, we shouldn't change the Bible. Well, when they start reading the Bible in this language, they'll get a little uncomfortable with that position. And they're not changing the Bible. They're changing the translation of the Bible into something that people can understand today. Excuse me. This one is interesting to me because when I went to Scotland a couple of times, excuse me, everybody was talking about their bairns, Bairnes. Fusher bairns, they would say. How's your children? How's your kids? The Scottish word for kids, children, is bairns, Bairnes. And this quote from Caedmon says, Siop Erin Bairnum. Bairnum is the word for children. And they're still using that word in Scotland, bairns, children. Which is fascinating to me because that word has hung on over the over the years. Look at the bottom line down there. Heaven horofa. Heaven, as a roof, rofa, the roof, like the roof of your house. Oh, there's so much we could talk about there, but we don't need to. Excuse me. This is the kind of medieval painting or diptych that you would see Bible stories pictured in. You've got the story of the resurrection. You've got some other stories in there. And so a priest or somebody might just point at one of those pictures and tell them in their primitive English language a little bit about the Bible story that picture represents. I think this probably is some of the resurrection appearances after the resurrection. I think you've got Peter and John going to the tomb, or maybe the two walking on the road to Emmaus. You've got the people out on the sea, or maybe it's some other gospel stories. I don't know, but they would use these to tell the stories. Okay, so Yarrow, which is this monastery up there on the coast that you see at the top of this map, was where the Venerable Bede lived. And this is the ruins of that monastery. And it is because of the writings of Bede that we know some of the history of this early part of England. This manuscript that you see over to the left is a manuscript of Bede's history of the English church and people in Old English. And those over in England and other places that study the language of Old English would study this manuscript, which is quite a big book. I've got the book in modern English. And they would learn about the words and the grammar and everything from doing that. This is one of Bede's prayers that is translated into modern English. Bede says, I implore you, good Jesus, that as in your mercy you have given me to drink in with delight the words of your knowledge, so of your loving kindness you will also grant me one day to come to you, the fountain of all wisdom, and stand forever before your face. Amen. You know, it's just a sample of a little prayer that Bede wrote back in the day. The Venerable Bede lived from A.D. 673 to A.D. 735. And as we said, he translated some parts of the New Testament, notably the Gospel of John, but we don't have any surviving manuscripts of his New Testament translation. What we do have is his history of the English church and people. Here's another medieval manuscript of his history of English church and people. Some of these are very beautiful. This is Old English, I think, and some of the rest of them would be Latin. This may be Latin. Actually, this is in Latin. At least the caption is over here.
Dan, what is it written on?
It's parchment. Animal skin parchment.
Was it codex or scroll?
Codex. All of these were codices. All right, this is where Bede is buried in England. And it's real funny because the casket, the little casket is not very big at all. It's like when you go into this building over there, it's like, how could they get him in there? Well, the reason is he's real short. Years ago, it's probably been 20, 25 years ago, Cindy and I were, well, maybe even longer. It's been longer than that. It's been like, I forgot I'd been here 30 years, so let's make that 35 years ago. Cindy and I were over in England, and they said, one of the people we were with said, there's a house nearby that was built from ship timbers in the 12th century. Would you guys like to go see it? And we said, yeah, that would be really cool. So we go over to this ancient-looking place, and it's got the thatched grass roof and everything, and we get ready to walk in the door, and the doorway of the thing is like this high. So we've got to bend way down to get into the door, and get in there, and then the ceiling is real low, and it's got these great, big, thick ship timbers that it's built out of. And it was quite obvious from going into this house that it was hobbits that lived in that thing. And I saw this inscription on the wall, and it said Bilbo Baggins on there. No, but it was short people. Short people, that song is a great song. Their little bitty eyes and their little bitty feet and their little bitty voice that goes a beep, beep, beep. Don't you remember that song?
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
sing it.
People got no reason to live.
Well, that was written about these people that used to live in England and everywhere because they were all very short. And if you've seen any National Geographic stuff on the history of man, even in this continent of England and in Europe, Europeans and English people and stuff in this time period were very, very short, less than 5 feet tall, maybe 5 feet tall, really short. And so they grew over the years better nutrition and better stuff, and they began to be taller and taller. But Bede was a little tiny guy. Now, the next stage of translation were Latin-English interlinears. See, we've got that one translation of the Psalms that goes back to like the 700s. We've got Caedmon's poems that weren't really Bible translations but Bible stories, and they go back to roughly that time, maybe a little earlier. But then the next stage is Latin-English interlinears. In the British Museum, there is an 8th century Latin Psalter, meaning it's just a Latin manuscript of the Psalms from the 8th century, that's the 700s. And then in between the lines, about 100 years later, a guy came along and wrote an Old English translation of that Latin Psalter in between the lines. And I'll show you in a minute. Then, and I've got a picture of, I've got one of these, a photographic facsimile on my wall in my office, the Lindisfarne Gospels. These are Latin Gospels, like Latin manuscript of the Gospels, written by Bishop Eadfrith of Lindisfarne near the close of the 7th century. That's the late 600s. And the middle of the 10th century, the middle of the 900s, a priest named Aldred wrote a literal English translation between the lines. So this is another example of an early English gospel translation, which is an interlinear. It's really a Latin manuscript with little tiny writing in between the lines that's English. We have a missionary here named John Panisi, who was in Brazil for like 30 years. And Panisi writes real tiny. When he writes his name or when he writes a little something, he's got his little book and he writes tiny, tiny little writing. And it's like, good grief, how can you even see what you're writing? Well, this Latin, the English in between these lines looks like that. See this, I don't know if you can see this very well, but you might want to get, if you want to see it, get a little closer to the screen or look at the back TV. But the big letters on this are Latin, and then you can kind of see that in between the lines there's little tiny letters written. That's the English translation of the Psalms that's written in between the lines. So at least somebody was trying to get the English meaning of these to people. Let me back up a slide or two or three. You see where up to the very north on Northumbria it says Lindisfarne? Lindisfarne. That's the place where the Lindisfarne Gospels come from. This is the monastery of Lindisfarne, way up there on the northern coast of Northumbria. Dates way, way back in the 7th, 8th, 9th century. And this is the frontispiece of the book of Matthew, the really ornate manuscript of Matthew. And it says, let me shut this thing off. This says, Liber Generati, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ. But if you look on the far outside, like in the margin, you see the little notes that look like they're in the margin out there? That's the English translation of the first part of this. This is a look at the Codex. See, this is the Lindisfarne Gospels, the actual Codex. And that previous thing was just one page out of it. It's very beautiful, ornate. This is another frontispiece, and it's blurry, but you can see the the English written between the lines there. When I say a frontispiece, I mean the title page of like Matthew, the title page of Mark, the title page of Luke, the title page of John. And then the other pages would just be normal Latin and English text without all the ornamentation. But the title pages were always real fancy and illuminated. I got a real close-up of this one. And this is from the book of Luke. And you can see there better from the close-up the English that's written in between the lines of Latin. This is a Latin-English interlinear of the Gospels. All right, now, somewhere in this era, There were some parts of the Gospels translated. I'm thinking that this is from the Wessex Gospels, and I'll tell you about them in just a minute in a little bit more detail. But I'm thinking that's the next thing. Here it is. The first independent English translation of the New Testament was the Wessex Gospels. Now that means the first manuscript we have of any part of the New Testament translated by itself, not an interlinear, but just English, it is the Wessex Gospels from the 10th century. The 10th century, Brother Ben, is the 900s. Okay? And the reason for that is the first century is from AD 1 to AD 100. You know, it's not in the 100s. It's from 1 to 99. That's the first century. And then all the 100s is the second century, etc. So, let's look at this one. This one's a lot of fun. This is the parable of the sower. So look at the first line up there. So thesa ut eod se sower his seed to sowen.
Wow.
So, in other words, then ut eod, he went out, se sower, the sower, his seed to sow. So literally, therefore, then he went out, the sower, his seed to sow. Second line. Look at the words. And tha, he, so. Now, notice the word tha there in the second line. Tha, he, so. In other words, and that which he sowed. So tha means that. It also means which. See? And tha, he, so. After the comma, sumu he fällen with veg. Some fell with veg, by the way, W-A-Y. So W-E-G is W-A-Y, or wayside, by the way. See? Then after the comma, third line, und fuglas kommen and etentha, means and fowls, fuglas, fowls, birds, kommen, they came, and etentha, they ate it. See? So look at the end of that sentence where it says etentha. You got T-H-A there again. So in the second line, you had T-H-A, which meant that, and then it meant which, and now at the end of this sentence, T-H-A means it. Same word means three different things. See what I'm talking about or not?
Yes.
All right, then after that sentence, into the third line, Sothelisa sum fällen on steinite. Then some fell on stony ground. Steinheit, stony ground. There hit nefta mikla earthen. There it did not have sufficient earth. It didn't have the depth of earth. And hredlisa upsprunken. Hurriedly it sprung up. See? For theum, he naften there earthen deepen. For there it didn't have any depth of earth. Too much rock underneath it. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7th line down. Sothelisa upsprungen resunnen, the sun sprung up, came out, and adrugenen and forskrunken, it shrunk it up, it withered it. For them they nafed and wirtham. It didn't have deep earth. Then after the next period, Sothelisa summa fällen on thornus. See, some fell on thorns. And the thornus waxen. Now, you know, in the King James, it's always talking about waxing. He waxed this or waxed that. See that line? And the thornus waxen. Waxen means they really flourished. They really grew up. They really grew thick. They waxed. See? And notice also in that line where it says the thornus waxen, the word T-H-A now means T-H-E. It means the. So in this one little story here, it meant that, and it meant which, and it meant it, and now it means the. So the same word could mean different things in different contexts here. And then it says finally there on the third to the last line, Summa sotlisa fell on good earthen. Some then fell on good earth, good ground. And sealed them, waste them. It brought forth fruit. Some hoende gefieldne, some sixte gefieldne, and some thirty gefieldne. Some 100-fold, some 60-fold, some 30-fold. But the cool thing about this is we know the story of the sower, so we can kind of figure a little bit of this out if we study it. But what if we didn't know the story of the sower, and you opened this up and just started reading it to one of your friends, Tyler, would they understand anything you were saying? No, not one word. They wouldn't be edified at all. But it's the Bible. It's the parable of the sower. And it's 700 years older than the King James. Let me say that again. It's 700 years older than the King James.
Wow.
So if it was good enough for them, shouldn't that be good enough for us?
Sure.
Yeah. And so, see, when you show people this stuff, some stuff begins to click in their heads, and they say, well, maybe I'm not thinking about this the right way. Wessex Gospels, first independent English translation, meaning not an interlinear, just all English, 10th century, 900.
I really want you to read this with a strong upward inflection.
Is Ben trying to talk to me?
Yeah, I said I just really want you to read this with a strong upward inflection at the end of each sentence. That will be pleasing.
Hey? Hey? Seriously?
No. Next time you read some of it, just do it that way. It's fun.
Get it the
Yeah.
last. Get it the last. The last
It's
is.
impressive how you're able to pronounce all of it. That much is for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I've read it a lot and studied it a lot. But see, now this is actually a manuscript page out of the Wessex Gospels. And you have to really study this to figure out the way to say the different things. But this is how the Wessex Gospels actually looked. And the type, see, in this one, I'm going to come back to this, but see, this is typed out for you in our letters so you can at least see how to pronounce it. Whoops, but this is the actual text of the Wessex Gospels and how different the letters look and everything. See, so, and this also, see, that look at the margins of you can tell the parchment, it's parchment. You can tell it's like on the leather and not on papyrus. It's good stuff, good writings, but it's English. But as far as most people today, you could have fooled us that it's English. Here's another page. This is the kind of thing you'd be looking at under a glass in the British Museum or something if you were looking at the Wessex Gospels. Okay, so anybody ever heard of the beach at Normandy?
Yes.
All right. Normandy is in what country? France. So, in 1066 was what we called the Norman conquest. The Norman conquest. Meaning that instead of a bunch of people invading from Britain across the English Channel into France, it was the other way around. The Normans from France invaded across the English Channel into England, and they attacked all these Anglo-Saxon fortresses and villages and everything, and went a Viking, you might say, raiding and pillaging and raping. And the result was that the Anglo-Saxon language of the British Isles was infected with French. And it was an ancient form of the French language. And that changed the English language a great deal at that time. So this is the bottom line right here. The Norman conquest of 1066 brought great changes to the English culture. Norman French mixed with spoken English, Anglo-Saxon, so that before long the English of the Wessex Gospels was unintelligible to the masses of English people, because it changed the language so much that people didn't talk anymore like they did back there. So it wasn't but a few generations, maybe 3 generations, maybe less, I don't know, but then people couldn't understand the way older people used to talk, with a few exceptions. So language changes. It always changes. That's one of the fundamental principles that you need to get through your noggins, is that whatever language you speak, we love English because that's what we speak, but whatever language anybody speaks, it's always changing, always. And because language is always changing, we will always, always need new translations of the Bible if we want anybody to understand the Bible. All right, so this is another one of those early manuscripts. This is an 11th century hexateuch from around the time of the Norman conquest. Hexateuch means Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. And it's a manuscript from about the time of the Norman conquest. Still very antiquated English. The 11th century, or the 1000s, the 1066 in that neighborhood, that's roughly, between 1066 and 1611 is 500 and something years. So this is only 500 and something years before the King James. Now this is one of my favorite ones here, because just after the Norman conquest, you've got the writings of Chaucer. And when you think about the writings of Chaucer, there's all kinds of fun things there. But I love this story because it's about 2 guys that are getting in a fight. So it's funny. So it's the English after the Norman conquest. And when I saw he would never find to reading in this cursed book at night. Now what that means is, and when I saw he would never find, in other words, when I saw he would never finish, he would never stop. Second line, to reading on this cursed book at night. See, one guy is trying to sleep, and the other guy is reading in this cursed book out loud, and he won't shut up. See? And the other guy's trying to sleep. So when I saw he would, W-O-L-D-E is W-O-U-D, when I saw he would never stop to read this cursed book at night, all suddenly 3 leaves have I flight, Meaning, suddenly I tore 3 pages out of his book, right as he read. In other words, he's still reading, and the guy reaches down and just rips 3 pages out of his book that he's reading. And then it says, and eke I with my fist, so took him on the cheek. That means that after he ripped the pages out of the book, he popped him on the cheek, Brother Ben, like you said we should do to that one guy. He popped him on the cheek with his fist. And then it says that in our fear he fell backward adown. So when he hit him on the cheek, the guy fell backward down. Next line. And up he sturt as doth a wood lion. He jumped up like a wood lion. And with his fist he smote me on the head. He smote me on the head. That in the floor I lay as I were dead. So I'm thinking the next guy must have really cold-cocked him. See, smote him on the head, so that he lay as he were dead. And when he saw how still that I lay, he was aghast. He's thinking, uh-oh. And would have fled his way. He's thinking I killed him, see. Till at last out of my swag I brayed. In other words, he woke up. Oh, thou hast slain me, false thief, I said. And for my land thus hast thou mordred me. Ere I be deed, yet was I kisseth thee. Now that, I love that story. Because he smote him in the head, and he laid as if dead, and he said, thou hast mordred me. You have murdered me. So, but what's really funny about this too is, I go over to Scotland, and it's talking about some guy that died in the paper or something, and it says, he's gotten deed. In other words, he died. And it's just like this, right here. And some of these words in this are still the same kind of Scottish/Gaelic type words that they speak in Scotland, even today, in the back country of Scotland. So this kind of a language is the kind of language that we have after the Norman conquest, when it's been influenced by the Norman French. Okay? So linguists, what linguists would do is they would take this passage, and they would take passages out of the Wessex Gospels and out of some of the earlier ones, and they'd lay out words, and they'd find similar words, and they would connect the genealogy of these words and show the different stages of the word's development and what it means back here and how it was written here and how it was written here and how it changed up here. And then they're tracing the evolution of the language. But remember that all spoken languages are constantly evolving, meaning they're constantly changing. That's why the original language of the Bible, which is not spoken any longer, is so important, because it doesn't change. It's just frozen. And we can take that original language of the Bible in any generation, and we can change it, we can translate it into any language we want to. So it's not not any particular translation that we're trusting in. It's the original text that we're trusting in. And any good translation in any language can tell us what the original text says. I lay as I were dead, and I smote him in the head. All right. When I was a kid preacher, I smoot a guy in the heeds, and he lay as if he were dead for a minute. But I repented of it.
Dan tests you to us.
Hey,
Smooth
Dan,
on the heed.
Uh-huh.
the Beowulf, what kind of dialect is that written in?
I'm not, is that Chaucer?
Shakespeare.
No, it's not, is it? It's different. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the period of that is. You'd have to see what the time period of it was and then match it up. Wessex Gospels, this or earlier. I don't know. Don't know the answer.
I heard it read aloud one time in the original, and it was not quite as understandable as what you just did.
Okay. So it could be similar time period or a little earlier. All right, so, see, we've got all these old English versions. And then after this time, they started the Crusades, because I think it was 1099 or something like that, that the Pope started preaching the first crusade, and so they started going on these wars to the Holy Land after this time, and a lot of different things started being transported back to Europe and the British Isles, and society began to change much more rapidly after the beginning of the Crusades, because all of the stuff they were bringing back from the Middle East was stirring up the pot. It was bringing new knowledge and learning and things they hadn't studied for a long time. And so changing society was more a reality after the Crusades. Then you had this guy, of course, about the same time that Caedmon was writing his. And he was out there, traveling up through the Christian and Jewish lands and selling stuff and cooking up his Quran and talking about holy war and everything. And so Muhammad, he was born in Mecca, an orphan. And he was a caravan trader between Mecca and Syria. Syria is, of course, up north of the land of Palestine. And he encountered many Jewish and Christian people. And he had this vision, supposedly, from Gabriel when he was 40, and told him to recite in the name of God. The word recite is the word Quran, recitations, who by the pen has taught mankind things they did not know. He wrote the recital or the Quran over the next 20 years. And he conquered pagan Mecca in 630, and the whole population accepted Islam at the point of a sword. Islam was never about preaching back then. It was about you convert or you die. And Islam was one of the big change factors in Western Europe because of the Crusades and all the lessons that were being brought back. Islamic society, unlike today it's so backward, but back then it was light years ahead of Western Europe in mathematics, in astronomy, in medicine, in art, and all this stuff. It was light years ahead of the West in so many ways. And so the West began changing. Islam just means submission or surrender. And a Muslim is just somebody who submits to God or submits to his prophet Muhammad. So theoretically, we should all be good Muslims in the sense that we should submit to God, but not to the Quran. So Islam spread across what we know as the Arab world in the 7th century, and then in the 8th and 9th century it spread across North Africa, Egypt, went all the way up into Turkey, So here's kind of a list of the progress of Islam and the different parts of North Africa and in Spain. So by the 8th century, see, in the 700s, it was all the way across North Africa and all the way up into the Iberian Peninsula or Spain, all the way to the Pyrenees Mountains. And then if you go around the Mediterranean on the other side, it was all the way up into Constantinople or Istanbul, you know, in modern Turkey. It was all the way up around there. So it had already spread to all of those places and became the big change factor in the world back at that time. So this map here with the little Mediterranean Sea shows you by the medieval years how far Islam had spread. It was a monstrosity of an empire, a huge empire. And you see the purple up there in Europe that is Spain, and the line there at the Pyrenees Mountains that divided the Moors, the M-O-O-R-S, the Spanish Muslims, from the European Christian society.
Will you go back so we can get the rest of that list, please?
You mean this one?
You know,
No, the list of
The list.
when the time.
the list of the spread of it, that one.
Conquered.
Thank you.
Do you mean, which list are you talking about?
You just had it there, right? No,
2 slides later.
right there,
That
right
one.
there. Thank you.
See, what do languages do? They change. And learning causes new vocabulary, and it causes things to change. And all of this was the biggest change factor in the world during this time. Okay. So the first crusade was 1095. Sorry, I didn't give you the exact. I was thinking 1099, but it was 1095. And they went to try to fight the Saracens, the Turks, the Seljuks, and take the Holy Land back. And there's all kinds of different crusades, different armies. The Crusaders were terrible. They were selfish, and they were just as barbaric and committed all kinds of atrocities. And there was a great conflict between the Arab world and the European world. Looks like we're getting back to the same thing, huh? And the whole thing about the Crusades was to reclaim and protect Jerusalem. And to protect those that wanted to make pilgrimages to Jerusalem. Like it was a holy place. They thought they would be blessed in some magical way by going to this holy place. So protect the pilgrims that went on pilgrimages to Jerusalem. Now the result of this was, from the 12th to the 15th century, universities began to pop up all over Europe. These are all places where universities, little groups of people that were studying the new learning, started to pop up, including places like Cambridge and Oxford in England, in the British Isles. See, where all this new learning was taking hold, and people were talking about all these new ideas and everything. It's a little more close up here that tells you some of the dates that some of these universities began. Cambridge University in 1209. Oxford sometime in the 12th century, the 1100s. You know, all different ones that you don't have to know. We talked a little bit about this before, where they started getting together and talking, and soon it became formalized, and there began to be rules for how you study and what people were called. The Latin word, which is also a Spanish word, maestro, means teacher, maestro. So they would talk about a maestro's degree, meaning a teacher's degree, a master's degree, a maestro, a teacher's degree. And then they would talk about somebody that was very astute at something, and they would call him dottore, doctor. And some of these terms popped up in this time. So they talked about all kinds of things, and among the kinds of things they talked about was they were finding all kinds of translations of different things in different languages, and they realized that Latin wasn't even the original language of the Bible, and that there was a need for translation into different languages of all these people that were studying this stuff. Some of them were in Germany, some of them were in Switzerland, some of them were in the British Isles. Which brings us to John Wycliffe, who lived from 1329 to 1384. But we don't want to talk about him yet because it's 1243, according to Mickey Mouse.
True.